Oh my god! The Tony Award-winning, critically acclaimed Broadway musical Hamilton has been released on Disney+, and it's awesome! Okay, I saw the show back in 2017 at the Pantages. I loved it then too. Ever since then, I've been listening to the soundtrack on a regular basis, mostly when I drive to Disneyland. The show is written by Lin-Manuel Miranda, who also stars in it as Alexander Hamilton. He wanted to create a modern telling of the story of Alexander Hamilton's life, utilizing hip-hop style music and having a diverse cast. He began working on it in 2009, and it had its debut 6 years later. Of course, this wasn't his first well-known work. He also wrote and starred in the Heights, which is even getting a movie coming out next year. Hamilton, however, was such a huge hit with critics and audiences that it pretty much caused Lin's career to skyrocket. After how well this show was received, he started teaming up with major studios, mostly Disney. He starred in Mary Poppins Returns, voices a character in DuckTales, and even wrote songs for Moana, the upcoming live-action Little Mermaid, and the recently announced Walt Disney Animation Studios movie, Encanto. And since Lin is on Disney's good side, he decided to sell them the rights to release a professionally recorded version of the musical Hamilton. It was supposed to be released in movie theaters in October 2021, and they definitely could have still continued to go along with that plan. But because of the whole pandemic going on, Broadway shows got cancelled for the rest of the year. So to fill the void, Disney and Lin said, screw it, let's just release it on Disney+. And boy was that a great decision. We got to watch this Hamilton Pro Shot earlier than expected, and people who haven't had the chance to see the show finally get to experience it from the comfort of their homes. Of course, the actual experience of watching it live is incomparable, but this whole situation will come to an end eventually. Until then, I highly recommend watching the show on Disney Plus because it really is such a great production. But before I talk about the musical, I'm going to talk about how it works as a film. One of my biggest worries with them turning this into a cinematic experience was that I was afraid they were going to have too many unnecessary cuts to different angles in an attempt to try to capture everything, which would cause a risk of the viewers not being able to focus. Thankfully, this is not a problem. The cinematography is beautiful. When it needs to stay on a certain shot, it does it. The angles it chooses work very well. Some of them really give it a dramatic feel. There's faraway shots that give us a really good look at the stage, and there's close-up shots that show us the emotions of the performers. There are times when it cuts from one shot to another quickly, but it usually only does that to make the scene more intense. With the way that it's filmed, I noticed details that I didn't notice when I saw it live, and I'm sure there are still some more that I haven't seen yet. The way they go about this is they treat it like it's a regular performance. The actors sing towards the theater audience, and we even hear audience reactions throughout the show. This really added to the overall experience. An interesting choice was to have some shots from the back of the stage, facing the audience. I thought that was cool since it gives us a glimpse of what the performers are seeing when they are on stage. Since Disney was releasing it, people were worried that they were going to censor it. They did censor it, but not too much to the point where it's a big deal. Only 2 F-bombs were censored, aka the only 2 F-bombs in the entire show. They did this to keep the PG-13 rating. Here's my problem with it though. According to the MPAA rules, PG-13 movies are allowed to have 1 F-word as long as it's not used in a sexual context, so there was no point in bleeping both uses of it. Although, according to Lin, there's actually 3 uses of it, but I really don't think the one in Say No to This should count since the word isn't actually finished. And even if they do count that as an F-bomb, then this should get an R rating since that use of it is clearly used in a sexual context. Again, this isn't a huge deal, but the reasoning for it is just so confusing. Thankfully, everything else in the musical remains intact. We shouldn't focus on the minor disappointing aspect of it. We should appreciate everything else about it. Keep in mind, they did this for us. Now that I've talked about how well the filming of it is, it's time to talk about the musical itself. Right off the bat, I'm just going to tell you that this musical isn't for everyone, and I can totally see why. Some people might not be a fan of the music style or the fact that it's all songs with no actual dialogue. Others might just find it too historically inaccurate for their liking. Comparing it to the actual story of Alexander Hamilton would be kind of pointless because despite it mostly being accurate, it has some intentional inaccuracies so the show can work. I'm not going to be one of those people to point out every little inaccurate depiction because the way it tells the story is really genius. It gives us a different perspective on these historical figures. It really makes for an interesting tale. A lot of the songs are really good, not just because they are catchy, even though they are, but they are also expertly written with deep meanings and clever foreshadowing to later events. My favorite song is Wait For It, which is basically the song that deals with Aaron Burr's inner desires. To me, he's the most interesting character in the show because we understand the problems he's going through. He strives to achieve his dreams, but is jealous that Hamilton is becoming bigger than he is. They start out as friends and he slowly turns into the antagonist, and he gets so blinded by his own ambitions that it later on leads him to making some big mistakes. It helps that Leslie Odom Jr.'s performance is really strong. Same goes for everyone else, especially Daveed Diggs as Lafayette and Thomas Jefferson. In terms of performances, he is my favorite. He's just so charismatic. He really looks like he's having a lot of fun with his roles. The cabinet battles are where he really shines. The Schuyler sisters are also very enjoyable. One of my favorite scenes even involves them, where we see Eliza and Hamilton meeting at a party, which would eventually lead to them getting married. Then we see it again, but this time from Angelica's perspective, showing us her true feelings and how she is loyal to her sister. Renee Elise Goldsberry is also insanely talented, as well as Pippa Sue and Jasmine Jones. All three of them have amazing voices and get their moments in the spotlight. Anthony Ramos as Lawrence and Philip is awesome. The guy who plays Hercules Mulligan and James Madison is really good. And how can you not love Jonathan Groff as King George? He is just a lot of fun. And yes, when he spits, it's kind of funny. Lin-Manuel Miranda is also good, but kind of weak compared to the rest of the cast. This is forgiven though, since he's the one who put this entire play together. He really worked hard on this and it paid off. If I had to decide if I liked Act 1 or Act 2 the best, I would choose Act 2 because it was such a roller coaster of emotions. It even gets heartbreaking seeing the struggles that Alex and Eliza go through. The way they end all of it is perfect. As far as production design goes, it's really impressive. The choreography is well thought out and the staging is excellent. I love the ways they move the set pieces on stage. You can tell this took a lot of planning. The use of the turntable is also a nice touch. Even the way they use the stage lights just blows my mind. It doesn't feel like anything here was an afterthought. Of course, the show isn't without its flaws. I thought the pacing was choppy at times. Like, it would go from one thing to another and it would feel like something should have happened in between. This is mostly apparent in the first act, which is one of the reasons why I think the second act is better. In the show's defense, they needed to tell years worth of history in only 2.5 hours. So what they did manage to do is insanely impressive. If it wasn't obvious already, I think Hamilton is a masterpiece. Is it the best Broadway musical? Nope. Wicked exists. This isn't too far from that level of quality though. I enjoyed seeing the touring show live and I enjoyed watching the original Broadway cast on streaming. I hope I get to see the show live again in the future. Hamilton is the kind of musical that really left me satisfied.